welcome to my new video. Today I have Micah Losh. Good to have you here.
Hi, nice to be here. Thank you.
We're here promoting his new book called Mentally Diseased. For the video, could you more or less tell me what's this book about? What are you what is the main purpose of the book?
Well, so it's about my life, being born into Jehovah's Witnesses, and pretty much how my brain was shut off. I was pretty unquestioning and wasn't always obedient, but I did try. I strived for that, and really, just about every aspect of my life was destroyed, and I was left with nothing materially. Just nothing, and I kind of had to decide what I wanted to do. So it's an account of that. I feel like I know there were times when I felt very isolated and alone, and I really wanted to connect with other Jehovah's Witnesses. And I mean, I'm not saying I've had the worst life among this group. I don't want that title or anything, but I do know my exit was pretty extreme, so I felt like, it could maybe help other people who are struggling. It's also written as kind of essentially kind of a love letter to my children too. I mean, I for about a year and a half, it was that was most of my life. I dumped a lot of my life into it.
Yes, this book is definitely it's a heartbreaking book, and it's very revealing and goes to a lot of dark places. Can you
Mhm.
tell me a little bit, just a little bit of the history of yourself in the organization, like being born and raised as a witness, and I know in the book you talk about your parents, your father, your mother, your father's passing, just a little bit about your growing up as a witness and how some things you saw that changed it up, your view.
Yeah, so my parents became Jehovah's Witnesses a few years before I was born. I believe the late 70s or early 80s. I was born in December of 82. And our family, I really interacted with because they weren't believers.
Hmm.
Um, and my life was just the Kingdom Hall and, doing all the things I had to do. I remember the Revelation book came out when I was 5, and that had a profound effect on me. A sister told me these things are going to happen before you graduate high school, most likely. And that was terrifying. So I would take that book frequently off the shelf and go through it because I really felt, I mean, it's so convoluted and confusing, but I felt like there were truths in there that if I could, suss them out, it would maybe help me. And then as I became a teenager, I began acting out, and I was punished in the congregation and just essentially just mistreated more and more. You know, it, I think it's important that people understand how this religion critically fails its members. Anytime you need help, almost without fail, you will be, if not shunned, perceived as being sinful. If you're sad, that you pray it away. You serve the happy God. Why are you not happy? You're in the best life ever.
Hmm.
And it's really delusional thinking. And if you don't share in that delusion, you are perceived as evil.
Yeah, I found that elders, they have like a facade of being loving and caring, almost like HR in a sense. That HR, you think HR is there to help you as the employee, but in reality they're there to help the employer. So elders a lot of times they do that. Like you think you can go to them for help, which is what you did, but in reality they're not helpful.
No, and if you are, if you're rejected by the elders, you believe they are appointed, that their appointment is evidence of approval by God. So it's
Hmm.
really rejection from God. And I always felt that. I would even ask them. I would say, people don't like me in the congregation. I'm excluded. But but still they dangle that this is love in front of you, and you keep thinking, oh, well, I need to, if I just read a chapter of the Bible a day, maybe two chapters, oh, and I haven't been regular on the text. You're kept so busy and
Hmm.
inundated with tasks and all these things where you really can't apply any thought to it. You just think, oh, well, I just need to do it right, and if I was doing it right, I would be blessed. And it's nearly impossible. It just broke me. I mean, it took a long time, but that lifestyle, it cripples you if you're
Hmm.
born in, and
Yeah, it leaves you at
just
like an arrested development. Like you can't
oh,
progress because you're too busy working for the organization, you know?
well, and your development as a person is directed as you grow. You have to, because it's not written in stone, but if you're in your early 20s and not, reaching out for privileges,
Hmm.
none of the girls are going to want you. And there's that people want to get married because then there's this drop off where there are a few single people. And in my experience, the single people were almost always excluded.
Hmm.
And you're contrived because you're not allowed to be who you want to be. If anyone in the congregation doesn't like it, you're going to get pulled into a back room and be told you're not a good person, and essentially you're killing the congregation. They really use your love against you. It's weaponized because you think, well, if I'm doing this, Jehovah might withdraw his Holy Spirit. Even though I didn't really like most of my congregation, I didn't want them to die. It's just you're in survival mode. You cannot analyze what's going on or be rational about it. It's not possible.
Yes, yeah, that is absolutely true. Like, if it's not the ministry, depending on how much you were preaching too, but still, like Saturdays were almost always going to be used up for the ministry and informal witnessing. Although now it's so lazy with the carts, it's basically
Oh,
nothing.
yeah. I mean, you drive past these people at a cart and they're all staring at their phone, and
Yeah.
they're not on jw.org.
Nope,
And
they're probably on
I
Twitter
had to,
or YouTube or
I had
something.
to go, I had to go door to door knocking. I remember one time somebody pulled a gun on my mother and I was like 7.
Hmm.
That's psychotic. It,
Did you have rural territory, or was it all like city or metropolitan?
so, like suburbs mostly, and then I lived in southern Indiana for a while. So we had some, it was kind of rural. You would be out there. Like, I remember there was one guy, he had a bunch of llamas,
Oh wow,
and
that's
like,
really out there.
we would be, we would be out in service, and there was nothing going on. And then we would just, somebody would be like, oh, do you want to go see the llamas? And
And then
then,
they just
like,
drive her to their house.
yeah. And they're like in the car yelling at the llamas. And it's ridiculous, but yeah, witnessing. I mean, I really didn't witness much. Probably the last 10 years I was in,
Hmm.
and it's totally changed. It's so much from what when I was a child is the diametric opposite now, which is really just mind blowing to me. Because I think of people who are like in their 60s or 70s. What changes have they seen and excused? Because like they're the god awful music they make for jw.org.
I cannot stand any of the songs. They have
It's
one or two catchy ones. The rest are terrible.
yeah, and they make these well, and they're such hypocrites because they always say, do not focus on going to the gym, or physical health is good for a little. But
Hmm.
then if you look at all the videos, why are all the girls like ends? They find these really good looking sisters,
Hmm.
and it's like they don't practice what they preach, or pardon me, practice what they preach at
Hmm.
all. Don't be obsessed with looks, but everyone in our videos is going to be attractive, and yeah, they're just fundamentally hypocrites. It's really it's a lot to process. I still feel like certain waves of realization come every once in a while.
Yeah, some of those things they stick with you for a while, and I mean, of course, as you know, I'm still like early on in that process, or relatively early on. It's still hard for me to come to grips with some things and other things. Even though for a fact, your brain will tell you like, oh, it's a bunch of lies. You don't have to worry about it, but you subconsciously are still like worried about ghosts, essentially, things that are not going to affect you.
Yeah, it's really the power of propaganda. A lot of people discredit it, which I think is very dangerous.
Hmm.
And I remember I was probably 18 or 19. I didn't go to convention because I was always ignored at meetings and then assemblies and then conventions. It was just like a bigger rejection, and I hated them. And they're always like, "Oh, isn't it great? Would we like to send our warm Christian fellowship back to Bethel with brother?" And I'm like, "This is
That's pretty good.
no, yeah, because I'm miserable. I don't know. I hate this."
Mhm.
So I stayed home and I watched The Exorcist. I felt like there were demons around me all the time. And I called one of my friends. I said, "Will you come stay over? Because I'm freaked out." I love movies, and The Exorcist is one of my favorite horror movies, and I even fall asleep to it sometimes now. I've watched it a bunch the last couple years, and I don't feel anything. It's weird that like the faith and fear, just how it affects you. It has tendrils that just go into every aspect of your life.
Mhm.
And for me, I just think kind of challenging those things, sitting in them and feeling them has been the best thing for me.
Yeah, like some exposing yourself to things that you weren't allowed to or
Yeah.
not permitted to as a like fully in witness. I think that is, yeah, like a good way to kind of combat some of those feelings, because like you said, The Exorcist is almost like a comfort movie to you at this point, even though it's typically seen as
Right.
a I mean, I've never seen it, but a horror movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's like for me, I don't believe in demons anymore. I don't,
Yeah.
maybe they exist, but I haven't encountered them. That's kind of how I approach things now. I don't claim, have all this knowledge, but a lot of things is just like, yeah, I would need firsthand experience. Like, I mean, it could be true, but yeah, it's so bizarre to come out of that mindset. And but I do think it's important, like exposure therapy, essentially, and to reclaim things that you wanted, because just you really were granted so little free thought. I have a friend at work. I told him I wanted to go skydiving.
Mm,
Terrified of heights, hate them, but I feel like it's important for me to jump out of a plane. Like I feel like that would really help me develop. So
that's an experience.
yeah, and you can't do anything. It's just all about servitude to this group and being exhausted all the time, so you don't even have the desire to do anything.
Yeah, and even if you do like your best, it's still not going to be enough, because you could always do a little bit more. You could always
Oh
preach a few
yeah.
more hours.
Well, I think it was in the last couple of years there was an article or something on their website where a couple gave up their dog, which is so they could do more. And like they say, don't become self-satisfied. Pardon me. And I understand that, I guess, if but like not the extremes they're doing. Like you don't want to be too full of yourself, but it's just crazy. And even the promises are getting less and less impressive, because when I was a kid, like you'd have these illustrations. People are taking a nap on a panda,
Mm,
and
the famous
recently there was
panda.
a picture. Guy was walking a dog on a leash wearing a collared shirt in paradise. What kind of
Yeah,
paradise is that?
probably with khakis too.
Oh, the khakis, yeah. Like, it's just mind-blowing to me. Like, one of the things that it's silly, but I dreamt of it since I was a little boy. I always wanted to swim with a great white shark. I think they're
Hmm.
really cool, and that was like a fantasy I had for so long. So that's another thing I want to do is I really want to go cage diving. Oh,
Hmm.
I'm sure I'll be terrified, but it's just those childhood dreams, stuff that has nostalgia can really be powerful. And I think it's sinister, but it's clever that, they teach that paradise is real and get these kids to fantasize and imagine themselves in it. And it's easy when you're going through bad times to just be like, oh, well, in paradise, all of these things will happen. And
Yeah. Well, they set people up to fail, children to fail, and giving them these expectations that we know it'll never be accomplished. People will never walk into like a beautiful paradise and be able to wrestle with tigers and actually swim with sharks and do the sleep with pandas. But if you start them young, by the time they're older, they won't even question it. It's just second nature to them. They'll just think
yeah.
about it.
And it's bizarre too because my father died when I was 13. And more than anything, I wanted him back. And I really feel like I just turned my mind off. And
Hmm.
you never grieved him because you cannot grieve somebody when you're thinking, well, tomorrow could be Armageddon. Maybe he'll be back by the end of the week. It's just not possible. When I really analyzed Paradise, it's like, so the teaching now is my father will be brought back, and my mother has never been on a date since, but she can't be with the man she loves. They'll be able to be friends, but Jehovah will remove the desire of them wanting to have sex with each other, even though sex is a gift from Jehovah, and he'll certainly murder me, her apostate son. And last I
Hmm.
knew, she would still remember that Jehovah had killed me, but he would take away the pain attached to that memory. Like,
Hmm.
why would you want to serve that deity? Because they are a psychopath.
Yeah, it inherently is. It doesn't make any sense, logically speaking, because would that person even be your mother if they didn't feel how they actually felt about their own son?
Yeah.
It's basically stripping a person of their own humanity in a sense.
Oh, yeah, and it's emotional thinking.
Mm.
Like everything they say, reasoning from the scriptures, all that, it's just emotional thinking. Because nobody joined, in my experience, in 37 years, I don't know a single person that joined that religion when their life was going well. They either had a bunch of problems or they were born into it and didn't know any better. Nobody would join it and they had good things going on. It's predatory because I think in the early 2000s they started saying to preach in graveyards. I found repugnant.
That's despicable.
I would never do that. If
Yeah.
I don't go to my dad's grave very often, but if I was there and somebody tried to sell me something, I'm gonna knock their teeth out. That's so
Hmm.
callous and rude. But I know Jehovah's Witnesses who will go through the obituaries and write letters. You
Yeah,
know,
I've heard of brothers doing that. Of like you said, going to newspaper obituaries, sending letters to loved ones who are going through the loss of some family member. Like, how do you even how do you even consider that being something a rational human would even consider to do?
it, you know, a lot of ways it's embarrassing because I mean I consider myself a fairly intelligent person, and to to think about some of like the the Russian letter campaign. For to
Mm.
begin with, you're writing letters to Russian officials, but we're politically neutral. Absolutely not. And
How?
I wrote a letter to Vladimir Putin and signed my son's name to it. That's psychotic. And then when you look at like
Mm.
Declaration of Facts and that letter going out, and then Hitler, there was an explosion of persecution against JWs, which that's not in purple triangles. That was omitted.
Mhm.
It's like, oh, so was I complicit in causing persecution to these people in Russia? Watchtower does not care about its members at all.
Mm-mm. Nope.
It's crazy that people think they're the best loving people because they're some of the worst people I've ever met.
Yes, and actually, that's something that your memoir brings to light pretty well, like really well, in the sense that people think witnesses are happy, but your book shows that a lot of witnesses have issues with depression, with drinking, alcoholism. Alcoholism in the organization is rampant. Many, I mean,
Yeah.
one of the governing body members themselves, Anthony Morris, is known for being drunk. Um,
Well,
so
it's one of the few things you can do. You can't do anything. You can't play violent video games, can't watch horror movies,
no
you
marijuana.
know, and you can't do anything sexual unless you're married.
Hmm.
You can drink and you can eat. And if you look at the disabled section, it's almost all morbidly obese people. When I was 18, I weighed 300 pounds because my dad died, and everyone's telling me I should be happy as he was dying from cancer that he rejected a blood transfusion. Well, I was not. And but I hated myself because I missed him. So I was just binge eating, and then later I was a very heavy drinker. I mean, that's really all. You feel like it's okay. It's like a loophole, and two very destructive things, but they don't care.
Yeah, there's nothing as a witness that's in the organization, mentally, physically in, that you can't resort to. You can't. There are no resources. There's no therapists in the organization. The elders, sure as hell, they're not therapists. They don't know how to deal with people. I mean,
No,
they throw people under the bus. They're there to make sure you follow in line, not that you get help.
well, and I mean, their stance on therapy is a little better. I mean, I know in the 90s it was really, at least in my congregation, it was kind of looked down upon. But every therapist I ever went to without fail always suggested I leave Jehovah's Witnesses. And then I rejected that and went back to the people who treated me like garbage and just kept trying to fit in. And I just never did. It's
Hmm. Yeah,
crazy.
I think there's even a quote in your book, if I'm trying to remember off the top of your head, where you say that we always resort to the crazy or something like that. We resort to what's comfortable, even if it doesn't make any sense. Essentially.
Well, yeah, because I know in the past couple of years, like, well, when I decided, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna write a book about my experience,
Hmm.
and I didn't even really know the shape of it, but just kept seeing all these people that were doing the exact same thing and expecting a different result, and I mean, everybody likes to feel comfortable, and it was just, I realized everything that makes me comfortable is wrong. So I was like, what would uh, make me like step outside of the box and feel not feel unsafe, but just a little bit wrong, whatever. And
Hmm.
for me, I think that's been a very healthy decision because, like, I don't know, I really just have felt this massive weight off of me since I put my story out there. And when people interact and say they relate, I had one person once say felt like they were reading their own thoughts in my writing, which was very flattering. And it's really cool because I always loved art, I always loved words, and I always wanted to connect with people and affect them. And of course, Watchtower, no, you should be knocking door to door. You can't pursue your passion or what makes you feel most alive.
Yeah, and it's sad they rob people of their creativity, and they really leave you with nothing to replace it with. So now that you have an outlet like this your memoir, like you can finally lay all your cards on the table and finally give yourself like an outlet to explain how you feel. So yeah.
And well, and also I feel like, I mean, yeah, the stuff in the book, there's a lot of, I don't try and paint myself as a hero, or I mean, I
Hmm.
just say what happened. But it really feels like I'm talking about a different person, because it's like I was absolutely destroyed, and then I'm not perfect by any means, but it's like, okay, now if I'm gonna move on, I have to decide how I want to move on, how I want to interact with people, and it's liberating in a way. It's very surreal. I never thought in 1,000 years I would be an apostate, that I would have published a book against Watchtower, talking to other apostates. I
Yeah,
it's just
it
very surreal.
to go from a witness to apostate. I mean, in the eyes of a witness, is a complete 180 because you're
Oh,
taught that they're like the title of the book, mentally diseased, that they're possessed. If you, I'm sure you've been to assemblies and you see people. I had seen people in assemblies with signs and handing out pamphlets of like, oh, witnesses protect abusers and this and that, and
mhm.
your parents would like shoo you away from them because you're taught those people are demonic, basically.
Yeah, we had a international convention here. I don't know, probably maybe close to 10 years back, and there were apostates. So we all rode buses downtown, and then we took a bus back to the Kingdom Hall where our cars were. And there were apostates picketing, and I don't remember what they were saying, but one of the brothers started singing, and then the whole crowd started singing. Me too. I really felt like there were like angels among us, like Jehovah's Spirit. And it was so powerful and real and poignant. And looking back, I'm like embarrassed how delusional, but it
Hmm.
seems so real. And that's the thing that's terrible is the people who are subjugated by the propaganda are its most ardent defenders. You really, I'm kind of the opinion people either wake up or they don't. I
Hmm.
don't think you can force somebody to, because if you want to believe that you're going to live forever, I look at my mother. My mother will be, tomorrow's January 1st, so she's in 11 days, she'll be 70. What would that be for her if she acknowledged in her 70s she had wasted 40 years of her life? He had mistreated her son. Dead husband is never coming back. I don't know if it would be worse for her to wake up or for her to continue on that path.
Yeah, it's kind of like you're too far gone at that point.
Yeah,
You've
it's
you've
well,
dedicated your whole life towards a cause that you believe is true, and then it turns out not to be true. Do you keep going, or do you change your life around? And like you said, it's probably easier to just keep going, being a witness.
which is sad because I mean, I remember oh my book. There's a poem before each chapter,
Yeah.
and the first chapter I wrote that poem the day I watched Bottlegate because that was when I was like, oh, I'd been looking at some apostate material, but I knew, Anthony Moore's third's voice from his tight pants rant, and because
Oh
I
God.
laughed about it. I was like, what is like when you're a kid and you see the governing body once a year in a watchtower, you
Hmm.
can believe God is using them. But when like Let comes out, I mean, he's like Barney the dinosaur. I mean, he's
He
just
really is.
it's absurd, and I'm like, these are the guys. This is God's channel. I'm having trouble believing that. And to see him doing that when Bethelites have taken a vow of poverty, they
Hmm.
say, children give your ice cream money, and he's buying Macallan scotch. That was devastating. And for me, I knew it meant I would lose my mother, the only, parent I had and family outside of my wife. And then I'm like, well, and my wife is gonna, like, what? Because COVID's going on, so I still kind of thought it was Armageddon, but
Hmm.
I just drank. I didn't know how to deal with that. I had no idea. I was just devastated.
Yeah, uh, I've shown that video of Anthony Morris buying alcohol and buying a lot of it to other witnesses, and they adamantly believe it's not him or that it's doctored, some sort of CGI. Like, oh, apostates will make anything. It's like, no, that's obviously him. There's no getting around that.
When I tried to tell my mom about it, she was like, "Well, look at the Hulk in Marvel movies." And I'm like, "Mom,
No,
the Hulk doesn't look real. Like he looks cool, but no one's thinking that's real. That is him."
not the
I
same. That is not the same.
no, the power they control over people is really it's frightening, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, with witnesses and and the governing body pushing that they're so close to the end. That is one of my fears, and that's one of the things that pushed me to leave personally, is the thought that, oh, we're at the last of the last days and the last of the last days, whatever crazy nonsense he says.
Yeah.
And how far are they willing to take it as a governing body, as the leaders?
Well, if you look, they said you should be willing to obey us, even if it doesn't make sense from a human point of view.
Mhm.
And then earlier this year, they said newborn babies are enemies of God.
Mhm.
Not making any predictions, but it certainly seems like they could be setting people up for like a Jonestown event.
Mhm.
And that is frightening. My mother watches my son who's 5 now. And I remember, I think it was after book study one night in a family's house, probably 6 at the most, and I was like, "Mom, good for nothing slave, really?" I'm like, that seems kind of harsh.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine looking at my child and telling him you are a good for nothing slave, and then they're like, "Oh, well, it's taken out of context." How? Like, words have a meaning. That good for nothing, but it's sweet. It's absurd.
Yeah. The witnesses only care about context when it's convenient to them. But when it's
Oh yeah.
inconvenient, they don't care about context.
They cherry pick everything. I mean, wedding bands, I think, have pagan origins.
Yeah.
JWs were,
Pinatas.
yeah, but it's about the things that will alienate their members from the outside world. And it's just, I don't know.
Yeah,
Sometimes I just it's too much. I'm like, it's just insane.
yeah, you can really go down a rabbit hole with with
Yeah.
thinking about all the stuff the organization does, imposes on its members, how it makes you feel as someone who's left.
Yeah. And it's really insidious just because, yeah, I mean, they essentially hobble you, and then if they throw you out into the world. And it, I don't know, I've been fortunate enough where I work. There are a lot of supportive people, and they're younger, but like, even when I told them about really offensive beliefs I held or things I've done that are difficult, like, oh, well, you didn't know any better, and which is staggering to me. I'm like, oh, well, thank you. And or they'll be
Mhm.
like, well, they'll be like, yeah, but based on what you've told me, it's no wonder you were drinking yourself to death. And I'm not trying to excuse it. Um, but like the kindness I felt from, because I work in a bar, just it's overwhelming to me because I just didn't experience that as a Jehovah's Witness at all. I
Mhm.
told people I was going to kill myself, and they just stopped talking to me.
It's
Like,
that is the exact opposite of what people are supposed to do when you say something like that.
yeah, and it's just it really it makes me angry because I know they still do it to other people,
Mhm.
and they're so broken and so afraid and so cut off that they just tolerate that abuse, and it's really offensive to me because I've known quite a few people that killed themselves that I grew up with, and nobody cared. It was always, oh, well, that's what happens when you distance yourself from Jehovah.
Yeah, they set you up for failure if you leave the organization. And then when you leave the organization, if something bad happens to you, it's pretty much that's what you get, like karma.
Yeah. Well, and then they'll, but time and unforeseen occurrence, but then they'll be like, oh, well, there was, witnesses have died in what, hurricanes and stuff.
Hmm.
But then they'll pick certain things and be like, oh, isn't this evidence of Jehovah's hand? And
Yeah.
no, it's not. Like,
Why would Jehovah even allow a hurricane or whatever to affect his people in the first place? I thought they were supposed to be his his nation.
yeah, well, and one of the things I had to realize is even if this is the true religion, Jehovah is going to kill me for being disobedient, I outright have no respect for him. As a deity, if this is the best he can do, I am not impressed. You
Yeah,
know, if that's the best you have, you do not deserve anything.
yeah. I feel the exact same way. It's very odd way to act as a loving God to act in such an unloving way.
Yeah, and because I mean, that would be like if somebody insulted me and challenged my name and I just start punching my son in the face every single day. Like, why are you punishing your children based on your own ego? If you just killed Satan the day it happened, well, what's the problem? Who's going to really challenge that? You know, like that, if you killed him and eliminated evil and then continue to bless your children, you would be a God of love. But when the flood, you're gonna tell me Jehovah didn't know that wouldn't work? He still did it. And just the Bible is such a despicable book.
Yeah,
And I
it's a
I
it's
read
a
it a lot.
it's a wonder how you even believed in it after you stop when you actually analyze it, critically.
Yeah, and you look at these stories and you're like, well, this is insane. You know, there's all this incest and horrible things. You I remember reading it and it just not registering. Like, what, Lot, when the city wanted to gang rape the angels, and he's like, "Oh, take my daughters." I'm like, "This is the
Yeah.
hero
And
in
then
this
he's in a cave
story?"
and and then he's, has sex with his daughters.
Well, yeah, and oh, God, and you hear those stories from birth because there is no division between children and adults.
Mm.
Think of some of the local needs or like some of the Bible readings or parts and just wildly inappropriate. I would be livid if my child heard those stories.
Oh yes, yes. No, a lot of it comes to that. Like, I'm not sure if it's the cognitive dissonance or just you getting used to it, but witnesses. You're at the meeting, Sunday talk, whatever. People are talking. They could be saying outrageous things, and you're just nodding your head along. Oh yes, good point. You're not even actually paying attention to what they're saying or singing.
Oh, well, and it's weird too because I feel like, oh, I forget how long ago it was when the simplified edition came out, and then the way they speak to you is so slow and halting.
Yeah.
For me, I really wonder if there's like a method of brainwashing behind that because
Mhm.
you just sit there. I mean, I remember sitting at like conventions, 8 hours, just I don't know. It's like I was awake, but just had receded into my mind. I don't know what I was thinking. It just because they always talk about this great education work we're involved in, but they're not teaching anything. I mean, when you read those articles about like they'll have articles about like health and they'll be like, well, people have found that exercise and healthy diet is it's so juvenile.
Yeah, they really do treat witnesses now more than ever, like you said, especially since the simplified versions, but for a while now, like children.
Oh yeah. Well, and I think they don't want you to develop. They just want you to be an unquestioning drone. And like there's nothing wrong with happiness, but no one is happy all the time. It's not possible and you know, uh, they, they just want to create this mindset where you're just like best life ever and
um,
all that and
I see sometimes witnesses they have their Instagram profiles, Etsy's of like, stuff they're selling, best life ever, Psalm this. It's like it's almost like they're capitalizing on the facade itself.
oh, I think they are. I like to look on Etsy for like Jehovah's Witness merchandise and stuff because
Mm.
it's quite often very cringeworthy. But
Have you seen those Barbies? The cart witnessing
oh,
Barbies?
oh, that's amazing. I did see somebody made a spiritual gems board game. Like the cover, they're smiling like moon. They look brainwashed in the picture. Like,
Yeah.
well, and you can't. I just always hated get-togethers because I always felt like a bad person because yeah, you'd have these get-togethers where it's like, who do you want to talk to in the news system? I don't care. Like I don't want to
Nobody.
talk to Methuselah.
Yeah, I agree. What is he gonna contribute?
Yeah, and like it's so bizarre. You know, they're always like, "Oh, we have so much spiritual food and we're like I didn't I mean, the Awakes were probably the least boring things they released,
Hmm.
but usually hated reading the Watchtower. I hated the yearbook. I don't know that I ever read the yearbook a single year that I was in.
Yeah, I never read the yearbook and Watchtowers. You didn't. I never even prepared for Watchtowers because it was always the same stuff. So I would just mark a paragraph a few paragraphs ahead of where the conductor was, and then I'd answer off of like,
Yeah, I mean,
you know.
very superficial and base. I mean, once you accept, the core beliefs of this group, it's pretty standard, their stance on sexuality, homosexuals, all this stuff, but and also within the congregation there's so much cherry picking and they say that like elders don't really run their hall, but I know I was disfellowshipped in a hall and then reinstated in a hall that shared the same building, and there were inconsistencies even among just those two congregations. But you think there's this worldwide unity, people in the UK, people in Australia are doing the same thing as people in Kentucky, and there's no way it's true.
Oh yeah, no, no, no. And then not just it, also like based off of the language because I did Spanish language as well as English. Like I flip back and forth depending. And yeah, the congregations vary wildly. Like some of them will be more lenient towards music, others movies. Sometimes they allow different clothing options like T-shirts with band names on it. Other times no. So it really depends based off of the people. It's almost as if it's really not God's organization. Instead, it's led by people, huh?
It's almost like that. Imagine. Well,
Wow.
and I feel like every congregation probably has like certain people that they just mistreat so much. We had this older sister who she had some severe mental illness. When I was in my 20s, she was probably late 40s. And I just think hindsight, I think it was just being a witness and just being excluded and tortured for so long, it just broke her. And it's really sad because I remember my mom told me she was like, "Oh, well, sister so and so, she did drugs a long time ago and it fried her brain." It's like, "Well, maybe it wasn't the drugs. Maybe it was how horrible she was treated?"
Yeah, it's almost it does more harm than good being a witness.
Yeah, I mean, it, yeah, it's just I don't miss it at all. Like I do not miss there are people inside of it, a
Mhm.
few I miss, but the same time, I also have to wonder, like, was it ever genuine? Was it ever real? Because friendship is compulsory. So you just find the people who can tolerate the most.
Yeah.
And I know for me, during the absolute darkest time of my life, nobody I knew even cared I was homeless. Then, like, they wanted to reach out later and say, "Oh, come to memorial," or my ex-wife has told me certain people have asked like how I am, and I'm like, don't you dare give them a single bit of information about me. If you cared, you would contact me. You know, the it.
It's very conditional. Their caring and their
Oh
love. They
yeah.
only care when they want you to come back to the meetings, but it's not personal or genuine at all.
No, it's just well, it's all about survival too. It's hard. I'm ambivalent about it because sometimes I think about people and it's like half love and half hatred. I understand how shut off their brain is. It doesn't make it hurt any less. It's just
Hmm.
it's really a complex situation, and a lot of times when you try and talk about it, people just don't get it. They're like, "We'll let it go." It's like, well, but people are still suffering. It's
How can you let it go if it's still a problem?
yeah, exactly. Like I mean, it's not likely my son will ever become a Jehovah's Witness. His half brother isn't interested. His mother isn't. It's only my mother, and it's like it's really frustrating because my mom always had get-togethers. She never had. She would just blow all her money like entertaining the congregation. She almost never was invited to their house. There was no reciprocity.
Hmm.
And it makes me physically ill to think about my son being uh, in her house filled with Jehovah's Witnesses. Because if it's an elder, they could be a pedophile, but an elder would never do that. The two witness rule. Once you really understand how horrible this group is, I mean, if you were a monster, it would be a great place to go and hide out.
I agree. I think it somehow the organization is attracts not the best people somehow.
Well,
People down on
yeah,
their luck and people who are scummy.
yeah, and like I'm always the type of person when people be like, "How are you doing?" I'm like, "Not very good. I don't feel good." Like, it's probably not the best way, but I'm
Hmm.
just like, "Don't ask me if you don't want to hear."
Yeah,
But you have these people that are just always smiling and, "Hey
beady-eyed.
guys, isn't it wonderful today? We're
Hmm.
so." That's just creepy to me and sinister because it's not real. So who are you trying to convince, me or yourself?
Both in a sense.
Yeah.
Now, considering all that, what are some things that you kind of describe a little bit in your memoir, but that like helped you leave, and like what do you how do you think like this will help maybe others kind of see the organization for what it is and how they can leave or maybe make steps to leaving, making that decision, you know?
Well, yeah, for me, so my life kind of blew up in every way possible, and I found myself, I was forced to go to AA meetings, and there are just so many similarities between the two groups. I do feel that Jehovah's Witnesses is the more sinister one, but that kind of made me, and I also had evidence that my mother, everyone I loved, didn't care I was homeless in winter, no car, complete
Hmm.
indifference. So I kind of had two ideas. It was like, so am I just such a bad sinner that I'm reaping what I've sown? And then I'm like, well, no, the prodigal son. I wrote a heartfelt letter pleading for help and just cold indifference. So I kind of I was kept very busy in AA, and just the environment was very high control. People were doing hardcore drugs all around me, and I'm
Yeah.
like, well, I've never done drugs. I just drank, and I drank because I thought Jehovah it was okay. So I really just had to go through every aspect of my life and consider, um, do I believe this? Or if this is true of me, do I want it to be true of me anymore? And it's an ongoing process, but
Hmm.
I feel like, and one of the reasons I wrote my book too is my son, little boy. Really, him and one other person, I worked in a nursing home. I stay in contact with her, but they're the only two people from my previous life that treat me the same now. And I wanted him to know that, you can be devastated, left to die in the streets. You can still be stubborn and fight back and rebuild your life. And if that could potentially help other Jehovah's Witnesses, that would be great. Like I said, I don't consider myself a hero or anything. I'm not trying to paint myself as that. But it, it's sad that I know people are going to keep being thrown out into a world that doesn't understand them, that
Hmm.
they're terrified of. And so when I was writing, I mean, there are certain things that are embarrassing in it, but it was, if I don't share this, if I don't talk about the complete devastation, it's a disservice because I know other people will feel it. And if people, I just felt like I had to do that. When I worked with my editor, I said one of the key themes is I want brutal honesty, even if it's a hideous, ugly truth. Because, Jehovah's Witnesses, they teach their kids to pray for their God to murder 99% of the world. Where is
Hmm.
that in the literature? Nowhere. They don't, like, that is not healthy for a little boy or girl. Please kill all your enemies. And then For me, I'm thinking of Revelation book illustrations, the streets running with blood, the four
Mm.
horsemen. I was terrified.
The what is it? The lady riding the beast.
Oh,
Like,
the harlot of Babylon? Yeah.
yeah, those
And
pictures stick with me too.
yeah, those are some of my, I mean, there's some amazing artists, but those are some of my earliest memories, those illustrations. And
Hmm.
they just, I don't know, I just felt like I had to do it. And no, it's really, it was amazing. People were supportive. And I started talking about it online because I wanted to hold myself accountable because I'm the type of person, if I tell you I'm going to do something, I plan to do it.
Yeah.
So, but it was very surreal. Like, I was happy I was able to publish it on my birthday because that was symbolic for me.
Hmm.
And, and so far, feedback has been positive. I have, I think, 10 reviews right now, but even other people I've connected with, it's just been a really cool experience and one that I hope kind of encourage other Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-Jehovah's Witnesses to pursue their passions and, whatever.
Oh yes, I agree. I think this book, as dark as it is and heartbreaking in a lot of points, and really devastating. It really it shows that there is hope at the end, and then it's a tough decision. It's not easy, but it's something that people should definitely look into, because the organization does much more harm and much more damage than good than it's ever done.
Well, they don't care about their members.
Mm-mm.
No matter what they say, they do not care. The fact in their elder handbook where it says someone probably shouldn't be disfellowshipped for attempting suicide,
Yeah.
reprehensible. Everything. They fail, children that are molested, they fail women that are raped. Just and about a month before my book came out, before I self-published it, got a letter from my mom asking me to return to Jehovah, which hurt really bad. And it just seemed like an android wrote it. It was just bereft of emotion. But I know 2 years prior, if she would have responded, I'm being honest with myself, I think I would have gone back. And I was so devastated. So I am thankful that they are that cruel because for me personally, I had to be thrown out into the streets to die. And that was terror so big. I mean, it's almost like, what can I even be afraid of after that? It was so terrifying. Um,
Hmm. Yeah, it really has
so
the organization really, with its, I mean, brainwashing. Really, it has a chokehold on its members.
yeah, well, and kind of I had watched some apostate material, but you think you're in spiritual warfare, so what wouldn't the other side do? But when I looked up all these techniques used in brainwashing and thought control, and even I found a book on mind control in, I think it was Chinese war camps. Every single point was like, oh yeah, this was done to me. This was done. Every single one, it was like it was talking about my childhood,
Hmm.
and I really had to sever those ties because I wanted. I mean, I still want my father back. I love my father. I'm 40. He died when I was 13. I still think of him every single day.
Yeah.
But I don't, I've come to grips with I don't think I'll ever see him again. And I certainly don't think Jehovah's Witnesses can help me ever see him again. You know? But I think a lot of people, they have one thing, whether it's a dead loved one or be a handicap, I don't know, where they're just so hooked into this fantasy where
Hmm.
they'll just put up with almost unlimited abuse.
Yeah, they have that one thing that they're holding on to. Someone who's passed away, a future paradise, something. But uh, what they. It's not a coincidence that the organization's tactics, like the way that they do things, is like you said, like point by point, exactly what other cults, other brain mind control groups do. It's like the same thing. It's established already that it works, and they do the same thing. Even if they Bible that shit away, it's like the same.
And if you can get people to not trust their minds, believe that if you get people to believe that you have something that no one else can give them, that is really powerful. And even I've seen it in AA. I've seen countless people that, they're talking about they can't get sober, but they need a God to heal them. And it just me that was the path. I had to be utterly abandoned and then be exposed to another group that reminded me, and then I was like, okay, this isn't unique. This is about control and power and taking people's time, and it's criminal. I think people pursue their passions, and it just, you don't. Everybody is different. Everybody has different motivations. Even some people's motivations are really foul, evil things, but
Hmm.
there is no one all be all for people, and I just think people should be wary of that because it can have really catastrophic consequences.
Oh yes, yes. I completely agree, and I think this definitely helps shine a light on a lot of the issues, not just that witnesses have, but like other areas too. It really shines a light on that. Um,
Thank you.
so of course the book is titled Mentally Diseased. It's available on Amazon, Amazon Kindle store, and Barnes and Noble. Correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Perfect. And
Hey,
the links will be all down below. And I'd like to thank you for joining me on this video. Really appreciate it.
thank you for having me. It was a good time. I appreciate it.
Of course. And don't forget to check the channel, hit subscribe, hit like, and hit the notification bell to be alerted for upcoming videos. Thank you guys for watching. Take care.